everyone, and welcome to VikeFans.com and the Legends of the Longship series. I'm Tom Moore, and joining me today from the Twin Cities is retired Minnesota Vikings linebacker and KFAN radio personality, Ben Leber. Ben, thanks for joining us today. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, man. I'm really excited about this.
Well, you know, Ben, as I got ready for our conversation today, I tuned into KFAN on iHeartRadio to catch the last segment of the Power Trip Morning Show this morning, expecting to hear some of the great insights you have on the NFL draft and free agency. But instead, I learned of a college camping experience gone wrong, as the lake became your personal bathroom. And what I want to know from you is, has the SPCA been in touch with you about this violation?
No, they have not. You know, it was one of those situations where I think the stat was about 8% of the country, or 8% of people polled, had wiped themselves with just their bare hands. So, of course, we had to go around the room and talk about, like, all right, guys, embarrassing moment. Has anybody ever done that? And I technically did that in a lake in college at about 2 in the morning when we had way too many pops. And I'm like, what? I've got a choice. I can either do this on land or I can do this in the lake. I chose the lake, and I think I technically fall into that 8%.
Well, at least for the swimmers in our audience, we appreciate at least the warning. Well, Ben, before we ask you about the current Viking squad, I want to take a quick trip back down memory lane for your own NFL career. Does that sound okay?
Sounds great.
You played 10 years in the NFL as a linebacker, but way back at Vermilion High School in South Dakota, you rushed for almost 2,800 yards in your last 2 seasons. I'm curious, why did you switch from running back to linebacker when you went to college?
I'd like to tell you it was my choice, but it wasn't. When I got to Kansas State, I guess to back up and rewind a little bit, I went to their camp in like June, I think, going into my senior year. And they, you know, when you sign up, they're like, okay, what do you want to focus on? Offense, defense, both? What positions? So I said, I'm a running back, linebacker. So for part of the camp, I did linebacker stuff, and part of the camp, I did running back stuff. And I think very quickly, when it comes to the Division I level, they knew that at the time I was 6'2". I mean, it's pretty much full grown as far as height goes. So 6'2.5", and at about 210 pounds, I was this kind of tall, spindly guy with long legs, and I just wasn't going to fit. So when they offered the scholarship, they're like, now keep in mind, we're recruiting you as a linebacker, not a running back. So I said, listen, man, whatever you guys want me to play, if you're going to pay for my education and give me a full ride to a Division I school, I will do whatever you want me to do. So it wasn't really my choice, and I'm actually glad, because after taking just the pounding of playing a running back in high school and looking at what those guys do in college and then beyond, it was like, there's no way I want to be a running back. So switching to linebacker made the most sense.
But playing in the pros, did you ever give advice to LaDainian Tomlinson or Chester Taylor or even Adrian Peterson how to run?
Oh, absolutely. I gave it to them all the time. I said, listen, guys, this is how I run the football. This is kind of what I see. But, you guys can do what you want, but here's my advice. I don't think they took any of it. So, but in seriousness, no, never once. Jeez, I don't even think I gave anybody any advice, even in college. I quickly knew that the competition level and the talent level in South Dakota as a running back compared to what we were facing in the Big 12 was not even close. So I was like, you guys do what you guys do best.
Well, you mentioned going to Kansas State, and when you went there, the Wildcats really weren't a traditional powerhouse in football, but the teams you were on, they notched 11 wins during 3 of your seasons there and won a couple of bowl games. Ben, how did K-State prepare you to play in the NFL?
Yeah, I think K-State was phenomenal in a lot of ways, but when it comes to preparing guys for the NFL, I don't know of a program and a coach and Bill Snyder that does it any better. And I can truly say that because when I was in San Diego, I talked to Quentin Jammer and I, a corner out of Texas. We got drafted together. And being the fact that we were both in the Big 12 and we had kind of known each other through playing all that stuff, we kind of hit it off a little bit. We were talking, and I'll even fast forward like a year into the process, a year into the NFL, we were kind of chit-chatting, and he's like, you know what, I had a really rough first year, and I was kind of talking like why and what's going on, and he's like, Mac Brown in Texas, they don't prepare us for what you have to do to become the quote-unquote professional that everybody wants you to be. And I kind of said why, and he's like, everything's just kind of given to us at Texas, especially if you're a good player. You just don't truly have to really work for anything. And I think they kind of fool them and say oh, you guys are hard workers, but they're really not. And I compare that with myself, and I'm like, man, everything that we're doing with the Chargers and with Coach Schottenheimer and the whole schedule was everything that we were doing at K-State already. So for me, the transition from the Big 12 and with Coach Snyder into the NFL and with the scheduling and I guess just being accountable and all that stuff was right on par with what I was doing at K-State. So, obviously you had to learn the game, and there was a lot of adjustment with the speed of the game and whatnot. But when it came to just being a pro and, hey, this is our schedule and we expect you guys to adhere to the schedule, and we're not going to hold your hand throughout this process, and you truly have to be a man, like K-State was great at that. And there are times when I was going through it that I didn't understand. I mean, probably much like parents and kids. You don't truly understand as a kid, like what your parents are gearing you up for, but Snyder was great at it. And I still think that he, talking to some of the guys that come through through K-State into the NFL, like he still does a great job of preparing guys.
Sounds like that's a lot of what helped you hit the ground running when you were a third-round draft choice of the Chargers in 2002, is you rarely see a rookie start in the NFL, and not only did you start, you were named to the all-rookie team. How much did that preparation help you, and what was your experience like in San Diego?
It was profound, and the impact it had on me, just like you said, hitting the ground running. When I got to San Diego, I mean, there was a lot of unknowns, and you're really nervous, and you want to go out and prove yourself, and you want to make sure that you belong, you're worthy of the draft pick, and you belong in the league. So you still had all that pressure on you. But, again, I didn't have to worry about some of the little things. Like, honestly, there was never a second thought about, like, okay, this is the schedule, what do I need to do? I need to go work out here. I need to do that. All these little extra things that other guys had to kind of fit into the schedule, like, I didn't have to do that. That was how I was groomed for 5 years at K-State. So I truly was benefited by what Snyder did, and so that allowed me to focus more on some film study stuff and focus more on the little things to get myself prepared to be a starter. And it was a shock to me. I mean, they approached me, and I say they, Schottenheimer and the coaches approached me, I think the second or third day of full training camp. It was after the rookie training camp. I think we checked in 4 or 5 days before the vets did. And it was probably 2 or 3 days after the vets had checked in, and they walked up to me at a morning practice right before we were about to go. They're like, hey, we're going to experiment with you playing with the number ones in 9-on-7, some of these other drills. And I just thought that was just kind of, that was my naive self, just being like, all right, cool. I didn't think about what it really meant. I just thought they were truly just trying me out there. And I think in their mind, they're like, we're going to put him in there and see how he does, all with the full intentions of this guy hoping to start on opening day. And I think because I was a little naive and I just had my nose down, I didn't pay attention to what it meant or what it could mean. I just went out and worked. And it worked out for me. So I was opening day starter from day one, and luckily for me, I was opening a starter, throughout my whole career. So something I'm very proud of, and again, just blessed, I guess lucky to be in a lot of these situations and making the most out of it.
I'll tell you, they got the notice of the Vikings after a career in San Diego with 192 tackles and 10 sacks. In 2006, you signed as a free agent in Minnesota. Why'd you pick the Vikings?
Well, again, I think it was a stroke of good luck. Fran Foley, who was our assistant GM in San Diego, took the GM job here in Minnesota. Only because of that did Childress and the new staff even really know who I was and really had me on the radar, was because of Fran. And so to me, I think it was between Minnesota, St. Louis, I believe, and Oakland, I think, were looking at me as far as free agents go. And, it just came down to negotiations and where I felt the best fit, and had a conversation with Fran, and I felt like it was a great situation to come in as a free agent with a team that was in a change of leadership, with Childress coming in, with all these new coaches coming in. To me, that was the best situation, because I now get a fresh set of eyes on me, just like everybody else on the team. There's no preconceived notions about who's a starter, who's not. So I liked that idea of just being like, all right, I'm just going to be one of the guys when I get there, because we're all in the same boat with the new coaching staff. So the contract made sense and the team made sense.
When we look at your position at linebacker for the Vikings, you were a really strong blitzer off the edge, but it seemed like today so many of the Vikings have struggled with this skill set, getting caught up in traffic and really never getting beyond the offensive line. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what is the magic of executing a successful linebacker blitz?
Well, I would say that again, my time, in my 2 years in San Diego, I was fortunate to go through a defensive scheme change. We were a 4-3 for my first 2 years with Dale Lindsey as the defense coordinator. And then Wade Phillips came in and ran a 3-4. And I'm not a prototypical 3-4 outside linebacker, but and eventually that's the reason why I was not wanted anymore in San Diego, because they drafted Sean Merriman, who was more of a prototypical 3-4 guy. But in those 2 years, it allowed me to work on a skill set that I hadn't ever really worked on before. And so I was taught always from the beginning, just you have to have a plan. And it sounds so simple, but when you're blitzing off the edge, you just have to have a plan. And you have to have a counter off the plan, and things do change. But a lot of times I think some guys, they just blindly run in there without really knowing what they're going to do or the move that they're going to make. And it doesn't always work. But if you have a plan, you're able to execute it with more commitment and with more tenacity. And I think that's all it takes with, being a blitzer is all about an attitude. And a lot of times you see guys, even defensive ends, just by sheer attitude and willpower, they'll get by the offensive tackle or the running back or the tight end, and maybe not because it was a great rip move or whatever. It's just because they wanted it more. So when I tell guys to blitz, first have a plan, and if all else fails, just be and have this attitude that like nothing's going to stop me. Because when you think about blitzing, it is the single best play that you can be asked of you as a defensive player, because you have virtually zero responsibilities. Now, there are certain ways that you have to blitz, responsibility in rush lanes and stuff like that, but it's so much easier to blitz than it is to be like, all right, you got to adjust out of number two, and then you got to read the guard, and you got to read the number two's release, feel number one, all these little things running through your mind. When you blitz, you're free to go out and be a football player. And that doesn't happen very often in the NFL now, when you've got all these responsibilities with pass coverages and run responsibilities. So I look at it as a blessing. When you get your name called, just go crazy, man, and try to get to the quarterback. So it's really just an attitude thing.
Well, I have to ask this question. I think it was in your first year, you were playing in Seattle, and you came off a blitz and you sacked, I think it was Matt Hasselbeck. It may have been his backup. But what's it feel like for a player when you get that sack near the end zone, cause a fumble, but somebody else gets the touchdown? Is that frustrating that somebody else gets more attention, or are you just thrilled you caused the fumble?
No, that's pretty rare that you get a sack, fumble, and you recover, and then on top of that, you happen to recover for a touchdown. That's pretty rare. So, no, the sack fumble is awesome. I mean, I don't know of a better play. Obviously, you could top it off by scoring the touchdown, but no, I don't feel bad at all. I think Kevin Williams is the one that jumped on that ball and got credit for the touchdown. But no, I think he might get all the accolades as far as scoring the touchdown, but everybody in the building and all your teammates know that you were responsible for that. That's all that ever really mattered to me, is the respect for my teammates and my peers, and that was it.
Well, one of the most successful seasons, the most successful season while you were in Minnesota, was 2009. And when the Vikings decided to go all in with Brett Favre as their quarterback that year, were players bothered by the will he or won't he talk, or were you just excited to gain stability at the quarterback position?
I was just excited to gain some stability. And I think more importantly, and you don't really ever know it until that said person is with you, but you hear about the presence that Brett has and he had, and the innate ability to make everybody better, and just the leadership qualities that he had. You hear about it, and you're excited about it, but when you actually see him come into the building and the immediate impact he has without ever even taking a snap from center or throwing a pass, that's the thing that I think you only had to have him in the building for about an hour, and you're like, yeah, this was the right move. Everything that we did, everything that it took to get this guy in the building, immediately I think everybody in offense knew this guy's going to make us better, and he's going to make me better as a player. So I was excited to have Brett. Now, I've been open about the fact that I wasn't near as excited the next year when we had to send the cavalry down to go get him off of his farm in Mississippi.
Right.
At that time in training camp, it really took a lot of the focus away from what we had there going on at the time. And from a guy that was just basically saying like, no, I kind of want to retire. I just don't know if I'm into it. I don't 100% committed. Even though it's Brett Favre, there was a part of me that was just like, you know what? it's not ideal, but let's focus on the guys that are 100% committed and not waste all this time going down to try to pry a guy off a tractor and come play for us. And so I didn't necessarily agree with how that whole thing worked out and shaked out at in 2010. I was glad to have him back with us, but I just didn't like the way that we had to go about and do it.
Yeah. Well, we always heard the rumors in the media that Brett Favre and Coach Brad Childers had an icy relationship, and I'm curious, did you find that to be the case? And if so, how can a team still be effective when communication breaks down between a coach and somebody as important like a quarterback?
Well, I'd heard that, and the thing is, I guess for this question, it benefits me because I wasn't ever really around Brett and Brad, and to say that they didn't have some disagreements, I mean, that'd be a lie. I mean, I saw some of the disagreements, but I think a lot of guys have disagreements with their head coach. I had disagreements with Brad, and other guys did as well, whether they were public or in front of the team. But it doesn't mean that anything was being disrespected. And I think that's where it lies with Brett and with Brad was, yeah, they had disagreements. I mean, Brad has a certain way of running the West Coast offense because he's been running for his whole career as well with Andy Reid. And then Brett's been running the same offense for his 20 years in the league. So when it comes to some philosophy things and where the football should be thrown, I mean, of course they're going to have disagreements, but I don't think it was ever disrespectful. So I think, they had a typical, I guess, back head coach relationship where they agreed on a lot of things. They agreed on some other things. It wasn't anything that took away from the team or anything that we felt like was like, man, these guys are just completely disrespecting each other and not being professionals.
As you kind of closed out that season in 2009 in a game that was supposed to be really hotly contested, the Vikings blew out the Cowboys in the 2009 divisional playoffs, and you had a key interception in that game. Ben, what are your memories of that win at home in the Metrodome?
I think just the gravity of what it all meant. I mean, we knew throughout the whole season that we were a team that was on a mission, and it's actually very challenging. And I think the guys with Seattle and guys with Denver and guys that actually make it all the way that deep in the playoffs, they all feel the same thing. It's a very difficult task to be as confident and carry yourself with swagger without overlooking the game that's in front of you, the snap that's in front of you, the quarter that's in front of you. So kind of having this, I guess, humbled swagger and awareness of your situation is kind of difficult to kind of harness in. But we did a really good job of that. And when we won that game, it was kind of one of those things where I think there was a collective, like, man, this light at the end of the tunnel is getting very bright. And I think we all were starting to understand, like, what we were capable of doing, and all of our goals were just, a couple games away. So that was a great moment. And then to do it on that stage, in that dome, I still remember the crowd being as loud as they were and then being as appreciative as they were, and you could feel the excitement that they understood what was happening as well. So that was a great feeling. I mean, unfortunately, it all came crashing down later on, but it was a great feeling to know that everything that we've talked about and we've dreamed about was just around the corner.
Well, when you look back on your career in Minnesota, the 4 years that you were there, what in your mind was your most treasured memory in a Viking uniform?
Wow. I would say that game in particular, and then probably the one that's above all is the Saints loss. And not that it's a treasured memory where it's, I look at it and I smile upon it, but I think it's always going to be stuck with me as far as a lasting memory, because it was so emotionally draining and such an emotional letdown. And there's so many facets at that game that I still remember. I mean, I remember right before the 12 men in the huddle sort of thing. I remember looking at Jared and Chad Greenway on the sidelines, and we all kind of gave each other, without even saying a word, we all made eye contact with each other as we're standing there, like right before that play, because we were sniffing out the fact that we were going to win, and we were like, listen, guys, we're just a few minutes away from going to the Super Bowl. And that was what's going through our heads, and then the 12 men in the field, and then the interception, and then even for me personally, pass interference call that still get a lot of support from people saying it was a bogus call, but even those little things are always going to stick in my mind, for good or for worse. But It's a lasting memory, I think, for a lot of people. In 2009, it's going to stick with me forever.
Your response is surprisingly not uncommon, because we talked to Chris Carter a few weeks ago, and his most lasting memory was the 1998 loss to Atlanta in the NFC Championship game, and his thoughts are really about all the preparation and the guys and what you went through. So, it's not as uncommon as you think.
Yeah, well, that's good to know that. A great like Chris Carter is kind of thinking the same thing. I mean, you'd like to sit there and pick out all these like great wins and all this stuff, but sometimes the losses, and I think the things that you learn from losses are just as impactful.
Absolutely. Well, Ben, since you remain so close to the team with your broadcasting role with KFAN, I wanted to pick your brain about the 2014 squad. Does that sound all right?
Yeah, sounds great.
All right. Well, based on the talent you see right now on the defensive side of the ball, if you were the new Viking defensive coordinator, what defensive alignment or scheme would you use in Minnesota?
Well, I really think that he could just take this defense and do what he wants with it. And because there are so many holes to fill when it comes to who's going to be the starters, you're starting basically from scratch. I mean, the guys that we have right now that are pretty much inked in, you've got B-Rob, you've got Chad, Harrison, Xavier, and possibly Sharif. And I don't think that he's necessarily inked in as well. But so you have a handful of guys that, okay, these are the starters, but at those positions, those guys and their skill set, they could play in a 3-4. So I think that he has the freedom really to do whatever he wants. I think the way it sounds right now, he's going to stick with the 4-3 and build a defense that way. Everything much like he did in Cincinnati. But I wouldn't be surprised if he again just uses the kind of a hybrid scheme in third down situations and kind of runs a 3-4 and brings guys in from pressure situations from different angles that kind of looks like a 3-4. So he has that ability to do that too. But I think the base is going to be a 4-3.
Well, a little bit of controversy over the last 24 to 48 hours as the Vikings re-signed Everson Griffin to a big contract, 5 years and $42 million. And obviously he's not been a full-time player or even a full-time starter in the NFL. What role do you see him playing in Mike Zimmer's defense?
I'm equally as baffled, I think, by the signing of the contract, because it tells me, and I think it tells Everson and everybody else, that they believe that he can be a every down defensive end. And having played with Everson, and I understand how explosive he can be, I still think he's best served as a situational guy that, like I talked about with blitzing as a linebacker, he's best suited when you give him one direction and you say, you go after the quarterback, that's what your job is going to be, and we don't want anything else from you. You just use your explosiveness to get off the ball and go get the quarterback. Now, when you're an every down defensive end, now you start thinking about the run game, certain drops in zone blitzes. You have to use your brain a little bit more. And not to say that he can't do that, it's just that he's had the most success by just going after the quarterback. So I don't really agree with what they're doing. I still think they'll have to do some stuff by committee, like bringing some guys in off the sidelines in certain situations to give him a rest, much like they did with Jared. But I still think he's best served as a situational guy.
As we talked about, given he's never been a starter in the NFL, from your experience as a player, does that rub players like longtime starter Brian Robinson the wrong way, that a guy got paid more than them after proving little on the field so far?
Sure. I'm not going to speak for B-Rob, but I would guess that there's a little bit of him that's just kind of like, man, I went out here and proved that I am the every down defensive end, and this guy gets a nice deal. But you do have to look at the health of the NFL and the situations, how they were different. The Vikings have money to spend, and per the CBA, they have to spend a certain percentage of it. So money just has to be spent. And hopefully for B-Rob, salary cap's only going to go up, and when his contract expires, maybe he can lock in on another big deal.
Free agency officially opens tomorrow, and Ben, you were a free agent player 3 times in your career. How chaotic is that first week or two of free agency when you're often flying to multiple team locations, or maybe you're making a decision without going to see a team at all?
Well, when I was a free agent out of San Diego, that was kind of the case. The latter statement where I don't even fly anywhere. I mean, it was all handled through my agents and through phone calls, and I felt very comfortable about signing up here in Minnesota. So I didn't take any trips. It was a very easy free agent period for me. And it was nice. It was beneficial that I didn't have to sit there and fly all over the country and talk to everybody and kind of go through that whole thing. So that was pretty easy. Now, when I was a free agent this my last year, That was a little different. I flew out to Seattle, had a meeting with them, really liked what I heard. But to be honest, when St. Louis called, I was actually in Seattle. I was 5 minutes away from going to get my MRIs and all that other stuff to kind of make things official with Seattle. St. Louis kind of came into the mix. They offered a very similar contract. And again, I had to look at both teams and the health of the teams. And I sat there and thought St. Louis was the healthier of the two teams to win that year. And I was wrong. And it sucks that I was wrong. And I kind of laugh at myself now for making that decision. But, you know, Dale just picked up Tavares to be their starting quarterback. And been with Tavares for many years in Minnesota. And as much as I respect him, I was just like, you know, I just don't know if I want to go through the growing pains with Tavares at quarterback, knowing that we're probably going to be playing 70 snaps a game, 75 snaps a game on defense. So I didn't really want to do that. I thought Sam Bradford had a great year the year before. I thought he was kind of up and coming and was going to have a great offense. And it was actually the other way around. Seattle ended up having a better year, and St. Louis ended up being a very, I guess, just lack of a better term, a terrible year for me personally and for the team.
Ben, I don't think you ever filed your retirement papers. Do you have any free agency visits scheduled?
One of the greatest misconceptions in the NFL. Yes, I have not signed my retirement papers because they don't exist. And no, I have no intentions of ever. Man, I can run up and down a basketball court now without being sore for 2 weeks. So I'm certainly not cut out to be an NFL player anymore.
Yeah, but surely you can beat Paul Allen in the 40, can't you?
Geez, I would hope so. I would give up my whole man card, athletic card if PA beat me in a 40.
There you go. Well, the Vikings have huge question marks at the linebacker position. I figure you're an expert to talk about this. Now that Minnesota's brought back Jasper Brinkley on a one-year prove-it deal, do you think we have the starting talent on the team right now with him, Audie Cole, Mike Mowdy, and Gerald Hodges, or do we need something else?
Well, I think you still need something else, and surely it'll get addressed. You know, whether it's the draft or late in free agency with some young college guys, it'll get addressed. I still don't think I'm not as confident right now as maybe last year, and they were even a little thin last year, just because I had a little more faith in Aaron Henderson, and he actually, when he was in there, did a really good job. And there are times where I would say he was one of the best defensive players in the field for some games, but now you just have yourself with a lot of question marks. I will say bringing Jasper back was a good thing. I think Jasper fits more in a Mike Zimmer defense than he ever did in the cover 2, the Tampa 2 defense. Namely because the Mike back and the Tampa 2 has to run so much. And that just wasn't Jasper's deal. You know, Jasper's 255 pounds and is a guy that is comfortable with that weight. But when they asked him to, get down to 245, 250 so he can run a little bit more, he struggled with that a little bit. And it's just not his forte to play deep middle of the read cover 2. So to have him play more A-gap to B-gap and the way Zimmer likes to funnel everything back to the inside, I think he's a perfect fit for this defense, and hopefully he has a great year. At the weak side, I'm hoping for Mike Mowdy to step up. I really like what I saw from last year, just his demeanor. He just kind of has this football acumen, I think, more so than the other guys. So hopefully he wins that battle at the will, and if that's the guys that we roll with, then I guess you have to roll with it. You'd be comfortable, but you'd still like to add a few more guys.
And what are your thoughts on the Vikings re-signing Matt Castle, and how do you think this affects their draft plans for the quarterback position?
Well, I think it's, of all the guys and all the situations that the Vikings were faced with, I think 2 years, $10 million deal for a guy that is comfortable with this organization. The guys around him are comfortable. You heard a lot of guys, Greg Jennings even talking about how, when he's in there, it's just a different feel. And I think the guys were on offense were generally excited when he got his first start. It's something that they were wanting anyway. So he has this immediate relationship with the guys, and he's already earned the respect from them. So that's the biggest thing. And then, 2, I think Matt looks at it as like, well, this is a chance to work with Norv Turner, and he's turned around so many careers and mentored so many great players, and in his offense, it does work. So I think it's a win-win situation for everybody. The Vikings now don't feel like they have to be pressured into getting quarterback at a number 8 or trying to move around in the first round to try to get the quarterback that they want. Now they can sit back, get the best available, hopefully pick up a guy in the second and third round that Norv and Matt can kind of mentor and bring up. And I think it's a good situation to have a guy that has to sit back and learn the ropes and how to be a pro before he actually gets out there.
Well, in that situation, when you look at the draft, if you're the GM for a day on draft night and all of the top quarterbacks that people are talking about right now are still available for the Vikings when they pick number 8, is there one particular one that stands out to you as someone the Vikings just can't pass on?
Well, if they're all there, geez, I like Teddy Bridgewater if he's there above all the other 3. And I think he throws a great deep ball. I think he's got a lot of great touch. He can handle the deep shots that Norv asks for a lot of times. I will say, to go back to Matt, that's one area where I think he's going to have to adapt to. Norv's going to have to adapt to the lack of arm strength that Matt possesses. So they have to get a little more creative as far as not throwing the ball down the field as much. But I think Teddy could definitely do that. If Teddy's not there, I think Johnny Football is the next best guy. And I love the way he creates. I love the way he gets all the guys around him and makes them better. Mike Evans, although he's a big target at A&M, will be probably the second, if not the third receiver drafted. I think he's going to have a huge impact in the NFL. And Johnny made him better, made him Mike Williams. And it was his ability to create and Mike's ability to get open that was so dynamic. So I like everything that Johnny does. I think he will mature as a player off the field. I don't think that stuff doesn't concern me as much, because I think a lot of the stuff he was doing is just a lot of normal college stuff. It's just that he was put into a limelight and in a fishbowl that I don't think anybody else has had to deal with in the last 10 years.
Yeah. Obviously, we expect Matt Castle to be the starter. We'll probably have a rookie on the squad. Christian Ponder's under contract for 2014. Do you expect him to be on the opening day roster in Minnesota?
I don't. I don't expect him to be on the opening day roster. And I think that what's going to happen is something will happen either in training camp, and they either move him and hopefully he gets a shot to be a number 2 someplace else. Because I think he can be a quality number 2, a consistent number 2, and I think maybe that's where he's the most comfortable with the mindset, coming off the bench and just going out there and winging it. And I think where he struggled was when he's the starter, he's the guy, and he has to handle that pressure of being the starting quarterback. I think he's much better, and I think he had much better games when he could just come out there and just not think about that stuff and just throw the football and not think about mistakes. So I think he could get that opportunity as a number 2, and I don't think that's going to happen here, especially if they draft a guy semi-high in the draft. I think they could find a little bit of value for him, and it could be another win-win situation for the Vikings and for Christian Ponder.
Well, back on the defensive side, we still appear to have some holes in our secondary. We clearly do. Is there a guy that you would like to see the Vikings target, either cornerback or safety, during this free agency period?
No. My focus goes on to the defensive tackle position. You look at the void, both in size and what he meant to the team in Pat Williams, and he's really the reason why we were so good against the run when I was there, is because we had a guy like Pat, and obviously Kevin was a little younger, a little more explosive, and made some plays as well, but having a big guy in the middle, I think, is the key to most defenses. And I think a lot of attention gets paid in a 3-4, saying that you have to have that big nose to take on those blocks. But I think equally important in a 4-3 to have a guy that can play the shade and play the one technique as stout as Pat did. So if it's a guy like Linval Joseph of the New York Giants, getting a big body, I think he's about 340 pounds, to clog up the middle, going after a guy like him, I think would be great. Above a Jarius Byrd or a Werner, the cornerback out of Tennessee, above all those guys, I would take a defensive tackle.
Okay. And do you think there's any chance that Kevin Williams is in a Viking uniform next year?
I mean, there's always a chance that he could be. I think if the money's right, I think this 3-day kind of tampering period where they can kind of test the market, I think it's going to be great for a guy like him to see what people are going to give him for a contract and what type of years and the situations. So, I think if the numbers are right, I certainly don't think there's any bad blood between he and Spielman and the way things have kind of exited. So I could definitely see him coming back if the situation's right.
Yeah. We talk about cornerback, and there's nobody specifically you would go after in free agency. I want to ask about Josh Robinson, because he seems to have a lot of raw skills, but he's always around the ball and just never seems to make a play on the ball. Do you think this new defensive coaching staff can get more out of him?
Yeah, definitely. I was on Josh's bandwagon early on his rookie year, and for the same reasons you said, I think he's got some great closing speed. And I saw a lot of raw talent just in what he could do. And I saw a willingness to go out there and compete. And I think sometimes that's where a guy like Chris Cook, he lacks. He lacks his ability to want to be vulnerable and want to be on the outside and take chances. He's a very safe player. He doesn't take those opportunities to make some plays. I think Josh does that. He's got a little bit of that in him. And I think he just needs a little more massage when it comes to just having the true confidence to go out there and react to the things that he thinks he's seeing, because I think he has that ability. So yes, I think that Jerry Gray can get that out of him on defense. I believe Zimmer can get that out of him as well, and hopefully he has a huge year.
Does he likely return to the outside, because that's where he seemed to struggle when he was in that nickel spot?
I think he could still play nickel. I think playing nickel is not so much about having the speed and the quickness. You do have to have a little bit of that, sure, but playing the nickel is about a savvy. It's about having a better understanding of what routes are gonna hit you, and that's the thing that made Antoine so good at it. Was, yeah, he was quick, but you can't ever tell me that he was overly physical. He wasn't overly fast. He had good short area quickness, but he understood route combinations. He understood how they could beat him. And so it was just a mental approach that made Antoine so good. And I think Josh could do that too. I think you could start him in the slot, and if they really mentored him and said, here's some tips to think about, here's some pre-snap things to think about to give yourself that half a step that you need in the slot, I think he could be one of those guys that we could look to in the slot, and that could be his spot.
Well, as we turn to an off-the-field issue, I know you pressed former Viking punter Chris Kluwe pretty hard during your interview on KFAN a few weeks ago, and I'm curious from your perspective, what do you think he's really trying to accomplish with his comments about special teams coach Mike Prefer? And if you were to counsel him, how would you tell him to handle that situation differently?
Well, if I were to counsel him, I would have done a lot of other things more internally. I would have made sure that everything was, I guess, factual, and I would have voiced my opinions to everybody else before I went on Deadspin and wrote a scathing letter like he did. And I'll also advise him to just take a step back and look at your situation. For every reason that he threw out there for the reasons to let him go, he still failed to realize that those are the reasons that they let him go. I mean, those things attributed to the fact that they let him go. He came out and said, listen, my numbers speak for themselves. And then he goes on to say that he was basically a middle-of-the-road punter when it came to numbers. And as a veteran guy that's making a good amount of money, it's very easy just from those two things to make a business decision that says, hey, we're going to go with somebody younger that can hopefully give us more output. Now, I do agree with the fact that I wouldn't say his stance at all, but his ability to sit there and kind of be a distraction for the team, absolutely, I think, was an influence in the decision. That I will agree with. I think for everybody involved, that was kind of the last straw. And again, it wasn't about the stance. It was about the fact that when you go in and the head coach, your boss, asks you to stop what you're doing or change what you're doing, because he even said that they were willing to work with him on how to present the message a little bit better. He basically gave him the middle finger and told him to F off. Mm-hmm. And I don't know anybody in any corporate setting or any job, whether you work at a fast food restaurant, if your boss asks you to do something different and you put your foot down and say, nope, I'm going to do it my way, you can kiss my ass, they will probably be fired too. So I question, he's such a smart individual that I'm still baffled by his his ability to see things clearly in the situation.
Well, which gives me a great transition to really the last question I have for you today about the ability to have good judgment. And you've had the unique good fortune to sit in for the post-game KFAN fan line show. And after Viking losses, you get some really distraught, on the edge of the window ledge type fans. And sometimes they're pretty inebriated as well. Ben, how hard is it to keep a dialogue with fans who just want to fire everyone after every game?
That's one of the cooler parts of my job is doing fan line. It really is. Like, I look forward to it. I think Corey Cove and I are really on the same wavelength when it comes to a lot of these callers and where they're coming from. And we do like to have fun with them. But I love the passion that, as a Vikings player, there's always this kind of distance that you have between fans and the media and what people say. And you feel it. I mean, you feel the passion. But now that I'm in this part of the business, I truly get to see the fanatics out there and what it really means to me. And I love it. And that's what makes the game so fun. It makes the interaction so fun. I try to have fun with it. I think there are some people with some really good takes, but I think there's a lot of people with a lot of terrible takes, and I think it's because they're sitting on an empty 12-pack. And, again, we kind of call them out on that too. So it's fun to interact with them, and I don't find any frustration with it at all. I mean, there are some smart fans out there, and I will say this even about the position that I'm in. Because I played the game, I do see the game a little differently. But a lot of the opinions that people have are just by watching the game. And like I said, there's a lot of smart fans out there that it doesn't take a genius or a guy to sit there for 20 hours a week watching and breaking down film. A lot of the stuff is just meat and potatoes, black and white. Okay, we see that Christian Ponder struggles to be consistent. That's easy. You can see that. I mean, anybody can make those sort of assessments. And I think that's kind of across the board in football. So you don't necessarily have to be an expert to have expert views and expert perspective, because a lot of it's as plain as day as you're watching the game.
Yeah. Well, as our media advisor, can you tell us what's our limit on the number of cocktails we should have before we have somebody put the cell phone away so we don't call fan line?
Let's see here. Again, it all depends on your own body weight and what you can handle. But as long as you're not slurring, that's, for you, it could be 10 beers. For somebody else, it could be 2 or 3. But, once you start slurring, that's when we break out the jokes and we don't take anything what you're saying serious.
Well, Ben, the last part of our conversation today is simply a rapid-fire session where I'll give you one name of a teammate, and we're looking for a one-word or a sentence response from you. Are you ready to give us some quick thoughts on some of your former Viking teammates?
Oh, I suppose. I'm a little nervous about the word association, but let's go for it.
All right. Tavares Jackson.
Competitor.
Chester Taylor.
Let's see. Angry.
Okay, you want to explain that one?
he had this, I guess, mentality that I think it was a chip on the shoulder, so to speak, and he carried it with him all the time. And it could be anything it doesn't even have to be football related, and he could just be angry about something. So he used it very well. So I would actually say anger was his deal.
Okay. Troy Williamson.
Oh, geez, Troy. Yeah. I mean, not to be mean, but just couldn't catch.
Okay. E.J. Henderson.
Oh, man, a pro. Everything about E.J. I love the topic of E.J. because so many people outside of the Vikings and the media, they don't know the true E.J. because he was so quiet and really kept to himself. But, man, learned a lot from that guy, watching him play, the things that he saw, just his instincts, and he truly put in a lot more work and didn't talk about it than some other guys do. So he was a true pro.
Okay. Fred Smoot.
Clown. One of the funniest guys I've ever been around.
All right. Jared Allen.
Relentless. All the time. Whether it's telling a story, whether it's doing something off the field, he did it 100 miles an hour, and it was relentless. So I think that's what you see when you put on the tape as well. He's relentless in everything he does when he's on the field, and equally so when he's off.
Okay. Vashante Shanko.
Shanko. Potential. Okay. I look at Shank, and I don't think he truly understood, I think, the type of talent that he was. He had a lot of ability, and they just couldn't tap into it for whatever reason.
Okay. Chad Greenway.
Oh, wow. Again, I want to use the same word pro like I used for EJ, but I would just say great. He's a great guy, a great player that puts in everything. I mean, everything when he trains, the way he cares about the team. He's just great at everything he does. And the fact that I know him on a personal level, I mean, he's a great father to his kids. I mean, he's a great human being.
I'm glad you used more than a few words. Those are good to hear. Percy Harvin.
Percy Harvin, complicated. Percy is a rare talent that like I've never seen. A guy that I'm sure you've seen in person is not a very big guy. So when you see him running with the toughness and the tenacity that he runs with, it's pretty amazing when you actually meet him in person. But complicated in a way that not really sure what makes him tick upstairs. He truly could be one of the greatest weapons in the NFL, and he just, for whatever reason, seems to kind of sabotage himself at times.
And finally, Brad Childress.
Brad Childress. Been through a roller coaster ride with Brad. We'll always be indebted for him giving me a chance along with Fran Foley and bringing me up here. But things got kind of weird towards the end of my career. So I would just say, oh gosh, grateful but yet difficult. I'll put it that way. So it's kind of a two-word answer for him.
Got it. Well, Ben, we appreciate you taking the time to share your memories with Viking fans, and wanted to ask in closing if you had any final thoughts about your time with the Minnesota Vikings or their fans.
Again, kind of like I said about Brad, just grateful for the people here and grateful for their passion and allowing me to come in and just kind of feel like one of the Vikings. And, I grew up in South Dakota kind of knowing about Vikings fans. I was never really a Vikings fan, but now that I've been up here in the family of the Vikings, it's been great. And again, just I understand the passion that they have, and I have that passion now too. So just humbly grateful for the people that are around Minnesota and the Midwest, all the Viking fans. That I actually meet a lot of Viking fans around the country. I don't think they understand the reach that they have, but it's been great.
Well, Ben, we know the Viking fans appreciate you spending time with them today, and we want to remind our fans to catch Ben Leber on KFAN in the Twin Cities, online or at iHeartRadio when he appears regularly on the Power Trip Morning Show and with Paul Allen on the 9 to noon show. And he's also on KFAN's radio broadcast of Minnesota Viking football games in 2014. And you can also follow Ben on Twitter at Nacho Leber. Again, Ben, thanks for taking time out of your schedule to join us today on VikeFans.com and to connect with your Minnesota fans.
No problem, man. Thanks for having me on.